What do we need to be watching for over the coming hours and days in relation to all of this as it is developing?
I think there are two big things that we should be watching. First is what Israel may or may not do to Hamas leaders living abroad outside of Qatar. So that means Turkey primarily. I wouldn't be surprised if Israel now puts those leaders on high alert. I could also see a scenario in which Israel goes after Houthi leaders living in Oman. Again, this strike really showed that terrorist leaders that directly threaten Israel are not out of Israel's reach, even if they're far away from Israel's borders. The second thing I think we need to be watching for is a potential reset or reckoning with regard to the U.S.-Qatar relationship. This is something that's been long overdue. I think the Israelis really opened the door for the Trump administration to put Qatar's major non-NATO ally status under scrutiny, re-up long-standing terror finance concerns, potentially crack down on Al Jazeera. There are several things that the U.S. should be doing to hold Qatar accountable for its more adversarial behavior, and the Israelis really set the stage for us to do that.
All right, Natalie Econo, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here.
At this hour, Israel has confirmed an assassination attempt against senior Hamas officials in Doha, Qatar. I'm Lidar Lazi, and we'll get into all that we know at this hour as this breaking story develops. Reports and video show plumes of smoke rising from the Qatar neighborhood in the Qatari capital city. The IDF and Israel's security agency released a joint statement a short while ago saying they conducted a precise strike targeting the senior leadership of the Hamas terrorist organization. The statement says that for years, these members of the Hamas leadership have led the terrorist organization's operations and are directly responsible for the brutal October 7th massacre. The IDF and ISA said that prior to the strike, measures were taken in order to mitigate the harm to civilians, including the use of precise munitions and additional intelligence. Right now, we know that there are a number of senior Hamas officials still outstanding in Qatar, Khaled Mashal and Khalil al-Khaya. And reports indicate that Khalil al-Khaya was the main target of the assassination and was indeed taken out, but this is just a preliminary report. This marks a very dramatic escalation. Qatar has condemned the strike. So this is all preliminary, but right now I would like to invite Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and the former IDF spokesperson. He's joining us now by phone. Jonathan, what can you tell us so far? What do we know?
Well, I think it shouldn't come as a surprise. I mean, many people are surprised, but I don't think that people should be surprised because the Israeli chief of staff said so in his own voice more than 2 weeks ago that they are on notice. The external leadership of Hamas bear responsibility for everything that Hamas has done and is still trying to do against Israelis. And as such, now has come the time that they are legitimate military target.
Now, what can you tell us about,
far away?
I was saying, what goes into an operation like this? I mean, this is really a remarkable operation.
It is. Obviously, first the requirement is intelligence, live, updated, human-based intelligence with a lot of signals intelligence and visuals. And then you have to make sure that you have the ability to deliver the weapons. Looks like Israel did it with the combat jets and other aircraft. And of course, as the statement said very clearly, you want to hit the intended targets, but you don't want to hit anything else. And I'm sure that Israel was extra careful since it is striking in a sovereign country in Qatar to make sure that it did everything possible to hit the military targets only. And time will tell if Israel was indeed successful in taking out Hamas leadership and minimizing collateral damage.
And we do have an update that according to the Israeli news channel 12, the Hebrew news channel 12, saying that U.S. President Donald Trump did indeed give the green light for this operation, and that longtime Hamas leader Khaled Mashal, one of the senior figures, was also one of the targets, and he was at a reported meeting of senior Hamas officials in Doha that was the target of the strike, according to this report. So I do want to ask, Jonathan, you know, we had to assume initially that in such an operation like this, that the United States was at least warned in advance or was part of this operation, gave the green light for this operation. What are the likely ramifications of such a strike going to be?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that there's very little chance that Israel, in its current situation, would conduct such an important military activity without explicit American approval. And I think that approval was in place. And I think that due warnings had been given to Hamas and to the Qataris by President Trump and his team, by Envoy Witkoff and others. So I think this is along the same blueprint that Israel is operating against Iran and operated against Hezbollah, where we're working hand in hand with the Americans. And that is, of course, very important. I think the ramifications here could be quite interesting. This may lead to a breakthrough in negotiations, and this may be the last kind of push and persuasion that Israel has to do when it comes to Hamas, because for a long time, the external leadership was kind of off limits, and they were not targeted, and they were safe to live a grand life in Qatar and in Turkey. Now Israel is obviously signaling that that time is up, and that Israel has no more patience for the external leadership continuing and extending the war. And I think that this is part of the campaign to get Hamas to surrender, hand over the hostages, and end the war in Gaza on Israel's terms.
Taking the time to be here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so the first off, the big question that a lot of people are wondering, how significant is this strike by Israel in Doha, Qatar?
Yeah, so this strike is very significant. Right now, we still don't know which leaders were located at this meeting that was targeted, who was killed, who may not have been killed. But regardless of which leaders were or were not eliminated, this was a massive response by the Israelis to the ongoing hostage talks. It sends a clear message that Hamas leaders abroad are not out of Israel's reach. There's long been an understanding or an assumption that Hamas officials living abroad in Doha were safe, living in the lap of luxury, and this strike really shattered that illusion.
And what is the relationship like right now when you talk about Israel and Qatar? Because we know Qatar has been a mediator there for the peace talks that obviously have not come to fruition at this point. But we know that top United Nations officials are condemning the attack in Qatar and saying that the focus should be reaching a Gaza ceasefire deal, quote, not destroying it. So can you kind of break down for me what the relationship is like and if you think this will have any kind of impact?
Yeah, so the relationship between Israel and Qatar is an interesting one. Going back several years, the Qataris, for many years, were delivering aid to Gaza with the green light from Israel. That said, as they were sending this money to Gaza, they also were harboring Hamas officials and were reportedly sending money directly to Hamas for terrorism purposes, not only humanitarian purposes in the Gaza Strip. So it's a bit of a challenging relationship in that sense. Since the outbreak of the war on October 7th, the Qataris have been intimately involved in hostage talks. They're one of the key mediators alongside the United States and Egypt. And the Qataris have had 2 successes in brokering ceasefire deals. That said, the war has now gone on for almost 2 years and dozens of hostages remain in Gaza. So the logic of employing the Qataris, who are not neutral players by any sense of the term, to mediate with Hamas in Gaza, it's a questionable choice. As far as what today's action means for the hostage talks, I think it's pretty unclear right now. We're still waiting on confirmation as to who was killed, what leaders from Hamas remain, if Israel has anyone to negotiate with. But I think the strike happening in and of itself is a sign that talks weren't really going anywhere, and Israel had to do something big to potentially break a logjam.
Action against the top terrorist chieftains of Hamas was a wholly independent Israeli operation. Israel initiated it, Israel conducted it, and Israel takes full responsibility. Now, my question for you, is that kind of saying, hey, everyone, the U.S. is not involved in this? That's the first part of my question. But also, one thing that I find interesting is all of these posts from the IDF and Netanyahu never actually say Qatar. So, again, 2 different questions there, but want to get your thoughts.
Yeah, so I would be pretty surprised if the Trump administration wasn't at least read into this action shortly before it happened. I have seen reports that the Trump administration was aware. A major reason for my surprise is that our largest airbase in the region is located just outside of Doha. We have a pretty close relationship with the Qataris. So it would be very surprising to me if Israel took this action without warning the United States in advance. The lack of mention of Qatar, I think, goes back to that close relationship that the U.S. has with the government there, not just the government, but the country at large. We have lots of investments there. They have investments here. There are partnerships at all levels of government in every sector. And so I think this is a delicate dance that the Trump administration, the Qataris, and the Israelis are going to have to proceed with from here on out, given that Qatar has been harboring these terrorist leaders while also pursuing strong relationships with the United States and other countries in the West with that regard.
This is something you mentioned, but does it appear that we really are no closer to any kind of ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas now than maybe we were weeks, months, even a couple of years ago?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I don't see us any closer to a deal. As I mentioned earlier, most of Hamas's recognizable senior leaders are no longer living. It's unclear who Israel and the United States are negotiating with at this point. Continuing to go down the same road that we've gone down for almost 2 years that hasn't proved effective in the past is unlikely to prove effective in the future. And so I really think there needs to be some sort of change in how we're pursuing these hostage negotiations for something to actually happen and materialize.
My last question for you here. What do we need to be watching for over the coming hours and days in relation to